Crimson Desert has received a surprisingly large number of patches so far, adding new features, fixing bugs, and improving the graphics. We need to revisit this game because a lot has changed since our original coverage, especially in the latest patch version 1.03. This version adds official support for Intel Arc GPUs, adds in Intel-specific features like XeSS 3.0, it adds new graphic settings, including the displacement scale and detailed decorative mesh options, and it claims to have improved lighting quality in indoor environments. That's on top of all the other stuff they've improved in previous patches. So this video is kind of going to be an optimization guide part 2. I'm going to revisit some of the issues I found in my original optimization guide to see whether Pearl Abyss have implemented any fixes. I'm going to look at the new graphics options to see what they change from a performance and visual standpoint, and I'm going to show you what the game is like to play on an Intel Arc B580 now that we have official game and driver support. But before I get to all of that, today's video is brought to you by the Gigabyte MO27Q28G, a fantastic OLED gaming monitor that we highly recommend. The MO27Q28G is a 1440p 280Hz tandem W OLED with excellent performance, including up to 1500 nits of peak HDR brightness, deep blacks with per pixel control, and great factory calibration, which all come together to deliver a top-tier HDR gaming experience at a decent, affordable price. And look out for the glossy version, the MO27Q28GR, that's coming soon. Gigabyte also offer the MO32U2, a 32-inch 4K 240Hz QD OLED, which is one of our favorite gaming OLED panels. The MO32U2 is regularly one of the cheapest 4K QD OLEDs. I love the design and, of course, its HDR performance with up to 1000 nits of brightness. You might also consider the upcoming MO32U2 4 refresh, which is even brighter. To learn more about Gigabyte's excellent gaming OLEDs, check the link in the video description. First up, Crimson Desert's latest patches have made some headway in fixing the noise issues that I found in the initial version of the game, especially when using the standard cinematic preset without ray reconstruction or ray regeneration enabled. In quite a few indoor environments at launch, I found significant noise, lots of blockiness, sizzling, low sample count artifacts that were very distracting, especially in motion. I wouldn't say the latest patches have resolved these issues, but they've certainly improved the situation, so these artifacts are less likely to occur. What I'm walking through now are just some areas where I found problems with lighting artifacts in the launch version of the game. Those blocky flicker issues are less likely to occur after patches, so indoor lighting is typically more stable. That's not always the case, but in patch 1.03, I had to do a bit more hunting to trip up the lighting system compared to the launch version. One of the more obvious improvements is when using the max lighting setting, which is very taxing, but in the launch version also had pretty severe flicker in some scenes that made it a worse option than the cinematic or ultra settings. In this latest patch, those flicker problems are resolved, so max now always looks better than the lower settings and is a viable choice if you want to improve indoor lighting, though of course be aware of the large performance hit associated with this setting. Unfortunately, lighting in Crimson Desert can still be quite noisy in some situations. This indoor scene looked really bad using the ultra lighting setting in the launch version with tons of blockiness and noise. To my disappointment, using the same settings, the game is still noisy in this area in patch 1.03. Another example is the stair test from the original version of the game, which had really horrible lighting disocclusion and very obvious artifacts in motion. This area is somewhat improved in version 1.03, but there are still clear issues with stability around the stair elements. And I saw similar results in a couple of other areas like these curtains and so on. This is where ray reconstruction still offers the best visual experience. Even with improvements to lighting quality in some areas, I still found that DLSS 4.5 produces a less stable image than DLSS 4.0 when I ran into lighting artifacts that remain in the current version. This means that as of patch 1.03, I still recommend using DLSS 4 over DLSS 4.5 because when you run into the stability issues in DLSS 4.5, it can look really bad, even when using the native DLAA mode. Again, both DLSS 4.0 and DLSS 4.5 are more stable now than in the launch version, but DLSS 4.0 still has the edge in indoor scenes. With all of that said, a lot of Crimson Desert is played outdoors in the vast open world environment where you are less likely to run into lighting artifacts. If you can tolerate less stability indoors, DLSS 4.5 could be preferable if you prefer what this newer model brings, especially its superior sharpness and better handling of disocclusion. So keep that in mind when picking the upscaling option. Even after these patches, I would still recommend using native rendering where possible for two reasons. One, lighting effect resolution is still tied to the render resolution of the game, so you get much more shadow definition using native DLAA compared to DLSS performance mode as an example. And secondly, and this is probably the bigger problem, Crimson Desert still has issues with blur when using anything but native rendering. This is an example of the texture blurring issue I found with upscaling enabled in the original version of the game, and here's the exact same issue in the same area using version 1.03. Even with the improvements to lighting stability in the latest version, when upscaling is enabled, the blurry presentation you get overall is still problematic and makes it difficult to recommend using upscaling. Reading the developers' list of known issues with the game, I think Pearl Abyss are aware of this problem. They say a known issue is using upscaling in certain environments causes flickering in shadow effects and character hair, visual noise in certain skill effects, and rough-looking screen textures. I think that last part about rough-looking screen textures is what we're seeing here, so hopefully they do get around to fixing this so we can use upscaling in the game without this blur. Patch version 1.03 adds 2 new graphics options to the game. The first is displacement scale, which affects the game's displacement mapping. Higher settings implement a greater level of displacement, giving objects better surface depth and detail. You can also turn this setting off entirely, which makes the game look very flat. This wall, for example, goes from having a rounded corner with lots of brick detail using displacement scale high to being flat with a sharp edge with the setting turned off. Aside from surface depth, displacement scale also affects some of the artifacts we see around objects in motion, which seems related to how displacement mapping is implemented. When objects pass in front of surfaces with displacement mapping, there's this sizzling around edges like you see in these pots sitting on the shelf. Turning off displacement scale removes these artifacts entirely at the cost of a much flatter game world. But you can also reduce the level of sizzling by using a lower setting. Low is noticeably improved versus high, and medium sits in between. To me, I think medium, or potentially even low, offers the best mix between surface depth and artifacts. Off would be amazing if it didn't significantly hurt a lot of the geometry, so for those that find the artifacts annoying, I'd use low, and if you're not too fussed, then medium is a good compromise. From a performance standpoint, this is also a setting that can improve FPS, so potentially Pearl Abyss have added it to improve scaling on low-end hardware. But it's not adding better visuals than we got with the cinematic preset previously. It's important to be clear about that because recently the developers did say they were working on improvements to distant scenery quality that will give the game higher than cinematic visuals. These new settings in patch 1.03 are not these promised improvements that will be coming in a future version. In my benchmark pass, I found very little difference dropping the setting to low versus high, so the best choice of displacement scale is largely down to what balance you want between depth and artifacts. Turning it off, however, does improve performance by 4% at a noticeable cost of visuals, which is potentially something you'd want to do on lower tier GPUs. The other new setting is called Detail Decorative Mesh. The game says having this feature enabled adds extra decorative meshes such as moss, short grass, and small pebbles, and it can only be enabled with foliage density set to at least ultra. That's pretty much what I saw in this scene. Having the setting on gives you more objects in the scene like pebbles. Turning the setting off removes these small objects. Given there is no performance impact disabling this setting, it's something I'd keep enabled unless you are running out of resources on a lower tier system. If you're wondering about whether Crimson Desert's performance has improved in general since launch, either via game updates or driver updates, the answer is no. In my benchmark pass, I'm getting the exact same results on both Nvidia and AMD hardware after patch 1.03 and the latest drivers compared to our launch day results. In some respects, this is a good thing because it means Pearl Abyss have been able to somewhat improve things like lighting stability without hurting performance, but for the most part, the game runs roughly the same today as at launch. The one exception to that, of course, is Crimson Desert on Intel Arc GPUs. At launch, you couldn't run the game at all on an Arc graphics card. The game would throw up an error message saying the GPU is unsupported, and to begin with, the developers recommended Arc owners get a refund if they purchased the game expecting it to work. That was pretty disappointing to see given how popular the game is, and even though Arc discrete cards are a tiny fraction of the desktop market, Arc integrated GPUs are used in a wide range of laptop chips, so the lack of Arc support prevented the game from running on a lot of laptops. And this did seem largely down to the developers, as Intel claims to have offered a lot of support to get this game running. In the latest patch though, along with the latest Intel drivers, we now not only have official Intel Arc support, but also the introduction of Intel's graphics features, specifically XeSS 3.0 upscaling and XeSS frame generation. The game now supports all three main upscaling solutions and frame generation from all three brands. In terms of how Crimson Desert runs on Arc GPUs, there's good news and bad news. I'll start with the worst of the bad news, which is that XeSS 3.0 is very blurry in this game, much blurrier than DLSS or FSR. Here's a comparison of the game running on the Arc B580 at 1440p ultra settings using native TAA, then FSR 3.1 quality upscaling, then XeSS quality upscaling. There's a massive reduction in clarity using XeSS, which shouldn't be happening. Based on other games I've tested, XeSS should look better and less blurry than FSR 3.1 at 1440p. So this seems to be a broken implementation. I guess we can add that to the list of things Pearl Abyss need to fix related to upscaling in this game. The good news is that in the current version, Crimson Desert is playable on an Arc B580. I played a bit of the game using FSR 3.1 quality upscaling at 1440p, and a bit of the game using native TAA rendering using the Ultra preset, and in both situations I didn't run into game-breaking visual issues. I know earlier on some people were able to get Crimson Desert running on Arc and found pretty massive visual problems. That wasn't my experience with the latest version of the game after official support was introduced. What's maybe less impressive is overall performance. Using the Ultra preset at 1440p with FSR 3.1 quality upscaling, I was only getting around 50 FPS, and with native rendering instead of upscaling, it was more like a 35 to 40 FPS experience. Entering some of the more densely populated areas could introduce a bit of stuttering as well, whereas the game played a bit smoother for me on Nvidia and AMD graphics with very little stuttering. Like I said, in its current state the game is now playable on Intel Arc GPUs, at least the B580, but I wouldn't expect the most polished experience right now. Hopefully Intel and the developers can continue to work together to improve performance and make the game run a little better at 1440p especially. The B580 is better paired with a 1080p output in this game at the moment, and of course XeSS needs to be fixed as well. One thing that's really impressed me with Crimson Desert so far is how quickly the developers have been working to improve the game through patches. There have been an insane amount of changes, tweaks, new features, and bug fixes added through updates in the span of just a few weeks. I think this bodes quite well for further improvements addressing some of the issues that I've noticed since launch and in this latest patch. It doesn't seem like Pearl Abyss are at all done with this title, and we still have new graphics options to look forward to in future updates. For now, there aren't too many major changes to my recommended settings for Crimson Desert. You might want to mess around with displacement scale, but detailed decorative mesh seems mostly designed for lower tier hardware, and my recommendations around upscaling are pretty much the same. Now that XeSS and Arc GPU support has been added, we can confirm the game works on the B580, but I'd steer clear of XeSS for now, it's just too blurry. I'm probably going to keep a close eye on this game to see whether we get any further fixes, especially any that finally resolve those upscaling issues, and of course to see what the developers do to push visuals further. Hopefully the upcoming distant scenery quality feature will help to address the rampant pop-in, but we'll see after that feature becomes available. Anyway, that's it for this quick update to Crimson Desert, just testing the new graphics features and some of the updates that have happened since we first looked at it a couple of weeks ago. So if you do appreciate the independent testing that we do here at Hardware Unboxed, please consider supporting us via Patreon. Links to those in the description below. If you sign up, you get access to some cool benefits, Discord community, monthly live streams, BTS content, and plenty more good stuff. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.